Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am Jenny Levine with Durham County Library. Thank you for attending today's Meet the Author program, brought to you by the Durham County Library and the Durham Arts Council. Feel free to enter questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll try to get to them and a little bit closer to the end. Also, joining me today are Kelly Starling-Lyons, the 2021 Piedmont Laureate. She's been writing and publishing children's books for more than 15 years. She is a teaching artist, author of numerous easy readers, picture books, and chapter books, and a founding member of the Brown Bookshelf, a digital resource for parents, teachers, and librarians designed to push awareness of the myriad Black voices writing for young readers. With us today also is Don Tate, an award-winning author and the illustrator of numerous critically acclaimed books for children. I hope you read more about him and his work on his website, dontate.com. I'll be adding those to the chat. Now I am thrilled to present to you Ms. Kelly Starling-Lyons and Don Tate.
Thank you, Jenny. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. As I look down the names, I see many friends and excited to make new ones. So thank you for spending part of your evening with us. This is a real treat for me because Don is my buddy. We've been friends for a long time and we're both on the Brown Bookshelf together. We're both founding members. We worked on a book together, Hope's Gift, and offer lots of encouragement and support along our creative journeys. I just want to talk a little bit briefly about Piedmont Laureate. So I have the honor of being someone in this role, which is sponsored by 4 different entities: the Durham Arts Council, the United Arts Council of Raleigh and Wake County, the Orange County Arts Commission, and Raleigh Arts Commission. And the mission is really to build a bridge between, in my case, children's literature and the community. So this program is part of that. Don's book, Pigskins, the Paintbrushes, is focused on our Durham native son, Ernie Barnes. So what a cool way to help to amplify his work and to expand our knowledge about some of our hometown heroes. So we're really excited to have Don here with us. We're actually going to open the program with Don reading. So get ready for a little bit of story time, and then we'll come back and have a conversation.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. And I also want to thank Kelly for reaching out to me and arranging the special event. I want to thank you, Kelly, for your many, many years of friendship, for your collaboration at the Brown Bookshelf, and all that you give back to the children's literature community. You make our industry a better place. And also, thanks, congratulations on being the Piedmont Laureate. So I'd like to begin with a reading. Give me one awkward second to share my screen because I'm going to share visuals as well. Share screen, keynote, share, and let me get to the right slide. Play. So hopefully you all are seeing my screen. This is the cover. I dedicated the book to my friends at the Highlight Foundation because this is where I first started working on this manuscript many years ago. And Highlights is just a wonderful, creative place. And if you've not been there, I encourage you, beginning writers to take a class at the Highlights Foundation. Sports didn't come easy for Ernest. He couldn't run very fast. He couldn't dribble a basketball to save his life. No one picked him to play on their teams. Ernest felt pretty lousy about it all. I couldn't conform easily to the athletic idea, he once said. It seemed that most everyone expected boys to be good at sports, especially in the bottom, neighborhood of hardworking but poor African Americans in Durham, North Carolina. Ernest was good at something, however. He was good at art. In his sketch pad, he drew pictures of trees and clouds, animals and people. In the mud after a light rain, he sketched flowing lines all over his yard. Ernest never said much. His artwork was his voice. And I'll speak a little bit about this later, but this is this is one of the things that really, made me relate to Ernest, the fact that he didn't speak much and that his artwork was his voice. That was me too when I was a young kid. Now, opportunities to learn about art were slim for kids in the bottom during the 1930s. Art museums, as well as restaurants, hotels, and most colleges were off limits to Black people. Segregation was the law that kept white and Black apart. But laws didn't stop Ernest's mother from finding a way. Ernest's father was a shipping clerk at a tobacco company in Durham. His mother worked in the home of an attorney, a man who loved classical music and art. Sometimes she took Ernest along with her to her job. While she worked, Ernest scanned the art books the attorney had welcomed him to look at, books brimming with the works of revered artists such as Toulouse-Lautrec, Delacroix, and Michelangelo. Bold, expressive brushstrokes, bright, vivid colors, long, exaggerated physiques painted Ernest's memories for years to come. At school, Ernest was a bully magnet, a boy who didn't play sports, who loved art, played a trombone, and enjoyed reading poetry. He got teased for being different. They hated me, he once said. After class one day, kids circled around. They shoved Ernest. They snatched away his trombone. Ernest fell and skinned his knee. After that, teachers allowed him to leave school early to avoid more fights. At home, Ernest flooded his sketch pad with hurt feelings. When I was at home drawing, I was happy. I made friends with lines, Ernest once said. The taunts continued in junior high. One day, someone walloped him over the head with a book. Every eye fixed on Ernest. He froze. Always drawing, someone said. You gonna be an artist, baby? Someone else mocked. Then someone blurted out, he ain't got no guts. That's why he won't play. Play football. That's what real boys do, so many people thought. When the teasing became unbearable, Ernest dragged himself to the coach's office and joined the football team. Practice drills began with an ear-piercing whistle, but Ernest couldn't keep up. Running in a helmet and pads was like exercising in an oven. The coach fumed. You will never be nothing, he yelled. And his berating didn't stop there. You too pretty to play this game. That was it. Ernest quit the team. In high school, the pressure to play football turned up again. A large boy like Ernest, everyone thought, would surely make a great defensive lineman. Ernest had a plan, though. He instructed his mother to just say no should any coaches come snooping around to ask him about joining the team. But she didn't listen. Over a prayer and a plate of fried chicken, she and the coach made the final decision. Ernest would become number 73 on the Hillside Hornets. And that began a career path to Ernie becoming an athlete and a football player. He played football in high school and college, but he never gave up art. Art remained in his heart. And from this point forward, I'm paraphrasing the story. Even after becoming a professional football player, he played for the Baltimore Colts, the New York Titans, the San Diego Chargers, as well as many other teams. And in this team, on this picture here, you can see Ernest. As the team is having a timeout, he is sketching pictures. Again, art never left his heart. He retired from football at age 27 and began an art career. First as the official artist for the American Football League, and then later as a fine artist painting images centering Black people from the community that he so loved. He called the collection The Beauty of the Ghetto. Now I want to skip ahead to the ending, the final page of the story. Ernest Barnes had been a boy who loved art. He was shy, he was quiet. Others tried to decide who he should be, but Ernie decided for himself. He became an athlete. He became an artist too. This boy could be anything he wanted to be. Football demands creativity, Ernie once said. From pigskins to paintbrushes, Ernie Barnes grew to be a man successful at being himself. And last but not least, I just wanted to share this image of the real Ernie Barnes, along with some of the paintings from his very first one-man show. And then I think this last image was a Topps football card showing Ernie in his Denver Broncos uniform, number 55. And just a little secret, and I don't know the story behind the story here, but Ernie never wore jersey number 55. He was number 62. And with that, I am going to...
Wow, that's interesting, Don. Thank you for that wonderful reading.
Yeah.
I think that everybody just loved, it's always special to hear someone's book in their own voice. And I love how you took us through a story. You had, moments that were so lyrical and also so poignant when you think about how much it relates to all kids that feel a little awkward or that are teased for different things. So let's talk a little bit about when you were younger. Your book does such an excellent job showing the struggles and the successes in Ernie Barnes's life. So if we turn back the years to young Don, what were some of your stumbling blocks? What were some of the trials that you had? And what were some of the early moments that kind of gave you that feeling of confidence and guidance? And what role did art play in your life?
So I can't think of a time when art was not a part of my life. I often tell kids when I visit elementary schools that I must have been born with a pencil in my hand, because I can't think of a time in my life when I wasn't drawing or braiding or macrameing or painting or building something. I was the kind of kid who'd take an empty toilet paper tube and turn it into a puppet. So I was always creating. And I guess one of the stumbling blocks would have been that, I was never good at sports either. And my brother was excellent at sports. He was the sports hero in the family, my younger brother, Brian. And so my younger brother had this great relationship with my dad because they could do sports together. And I wanted no parts of sports. Fast forward to college, and I wanted to go into art. And, my family, my mom was always my biggest supporter, but my dad and my grandfather, they didn't think that art would make a good career choice. And so they said, Don, as an African-American artist, you'll never get a job. And my grandfather, even in his 90s, he would give me a call up, Don, you still working? I'm like, Grandpa, I'm still an artist. But, and it wasn't only coming, that negative message wasn't only coming from my family. One of my very first jobs, I worked for a guy who told me, Don, you ought to be thankful that I hired you, because art is not, commercial art is not a field for Black people. And I had another employer at a print shop once tell me that, Don, we love your artwork and you can work for us forever, because basically you're not going to get a job anyplace else, because this is not a field for Black people.
Oh my goodness.
So when I entered the field, I didn't enter with a lot of confidence. So I was carrying a lot of baggage, but I was confident in myself, I guess I could say, that I knew that I was good with art. I wasn't going to be a rocket scientist. I wasn't going to be a musician. I wasn't going to be a lawyer or an attorney, anything like that. I was an artist, and so I just never turned back.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure so many of us can relate to that. And I think in listening to Ernie's story and your own, it's even more difficult sometimes when it's not just peers that are bullying you, but also having some doubts about what your chosen career is or what your passion is from people who are close. So I think that it's, really awesome that you channeled that into your book, and you have that kinship with Ernie Barnes, and that kids reading it will be able to see that they can be themselves. So thank you for that. Now tell me about, how did you go from commercial art, and I know you worked for newspaper, and how did you get to children's books? What was the path for that? What drew you to children's books?
So right out of college, I started working for an advertising agency for a while, and then I took a job at the Perfection Learning Corporation. It's a publication company that produces educational aids for the classroom. Now, I was hired as a book designer, but I've always loved illustration, of course, so no matter what I designed, I would work illustration into my designs. So if I was designing a logo, that logo had big bug eyes and it talked. So I eventually became the company illustrator. As a part of that, I was able to travel to reading conferences like the International Reading Association and the Association of Black School Educators. And I fell in love with the idea of using my art to, to enhance literacy amongst children. One thing I should probably back up, though, is that I grew up with a famous aunt. My aunt, Eleanor
Yes.
Tate, who lives there in Knightsdale, North Carolina, I believe.
Yeah, it is.
Um,
Knightsdale.
She was my famous aunt. She was one of the first African Americans to get hired at the Des Moines Register, where I grew up. And no matter where I went, everyone knew about Eleanor. She, for a while, worked at the newspaper, and then eventually started writing young adult novels before she moved south. She wrote a novel called Just an Overnight Guest, which was adapted into a movie, and the movie debuted at the Des Moines Public Library. I think I was in college at that time, and I remember hearing my aunt speak. And she spoke about the importance of African American literature and centering Black people in our stories. And that night was the first time that I saw myself becoming a book creator as well. Now, I didn't see myself as a writer back then, but I knew that I would go on to tell stories with pictures in the same way that she tells stories with words. So I credit my aunt. If I hadn't have grown up seeing my African American aunt doing this great thing of writing stories and getting stories out there centering Black people, I would not have known that such thing existed, and I wouldn't have even dreamed that big.
Wow, well, it's so cool that you're now the model for so many kids. Those that you see in Texas where you live, those that read your books and turn to the flap and see your face, that you were the illustrator and the author.
Well,
That's my next.
I have a bunch of nieces and nephews who all want to be children's authors and illustrators now, and they're very
Yay!
talented. Yes.
More and more. We need more voices. So thank you. We talked a bit about you being an artist, but I'd love to talk about your evolution to being an author. I know that at first you had some doubts and some worries about, whether you would be able to express your storytelling in that way. And you've gone on to win lots of awards for your writing, which is amazing. But that's just another testimony that can help kids, hold their heads up high and dare to be brave. So could you talk about that, your evolution from illustrator to author illustrator?
So I always knew as a kid that I would grow up to be some kind of an artist. But if you would have told 8-year-old Don Tate that he would have grown up to become an author, I'd have told you, no, you're crazy, because I was never very confident with words. Even to this day, even though I'm a published author, I still don't feel as confident with words as I do with pictures. Growing up, people were always correcting my English. My mom and my grandmother, they spoke a very colloquial kind of a language. In 6th grade, I was bused out of our neighborhood, which was predominantly African American, to an all-white school where they spoke very differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I became self-conscious. I felt like the way that I spoke was inaccurate or bad or not as good as or something. And I just never felt comfortable with words. Fast forward, I moved to Austin, Texas in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And after having illustrated 50 or so trading educational books for kids, my writer friends encouraged me to write, to learn how to write. Again, I wanted no parts of words.
Yeah.
But so many of my friends in the SBWI, Diana Aston and Cynthia Lydic-Smith and Chris Barton and so many others, reached out to me and nurtured me and offered to critique my manuscripts. And they helped me to become the writer that I am today. So I often encourage newbie writers to get connected into writing communities, who are, around folks who are willing to support you and nurture you. And today I love writing just as much as I do illustrating. What I've discovered is that writing is, you're illustrating a picture in the same way that I would illustrate a picture with my, pen or a stylus or a paintbrush.
Mhm.
I use adjectives and similes and metaphors and nouns and verbs to create a picture in my readers' minds.
That's amazing and such a great writing tip for all of our emerging and writers that are already working. It's just a good reminder about how it's important to always be visual in your language and create that lasting image in the reader's mind. So tell us about, you've written about so many fascinating people and illustrated them. Kind of the world is wide open about who you could cover and, who you could focus on next. So why Ernie Barnes? How did you first hear about him? I think was one of the questions in the chat. What drew you to wanting to tell his story in particular?
Well, I grew up watching the television show Good Times.
Yeah.
My favorite, there weren't a lot of shows in the 1970s that featured people who looked like me, so naturally I was drawn to this African-American family who dealt with a lot of issues. My family was also dealing with a lot of issues. Well, JJ was always in the background painting pictures, no matter what the family was going through. He was painting pictures of these beautiful, elongated, dynamic African-American people. And I loved his artwork. Little did I know at the time, or maybe I did learn it somewhere along the way, that that wasn't the artwork that was created by J.J. Evans.
Right.
That was football player turned artist Ernie Barnes, who actually made a cameo appearance on the show a couple of times.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I didn't know that because I didn't see those 2 episodes.
Didn't
But
know that either.
so once I got into publishing and once I started writing, I wrote It Just Happened and the remarkable story of George Moses Horton on the advice of a couple of writer friends. After those books published and I found a little bit of success, then I started thinking about, now who do I want to write about? Who has inspired me? Well, Ernie Barnes had been a part of me for such a long time. I remember in high school sitting in my room watching the television show Good Times and trying to emulate Ernie Barnes' exaggerated style in my artwork. And I remember many years later hearing an interview of Kadir Nelson where he spoke about being inspired and influenced by Ernie Barnes.
No.
And all one has to do is look at the many art styles of so many young African-American illustrators today to see Barnes' influence on their work. So I thought this was a subject that young readers, especially young artists, need to know about.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know you already shared some of the commonalities you had, like both not being big sports people in the beginning and loving art. Are there other things that you found that you share with Ernie Barnes, things you have in common that surprised you or didn't? What?
Yeah, so many things. Originally wrote the manuscript and it was a pretty much birth to death kind of a story.
Mm-hmm.
And after it was announced, what I learned is that another book on the topic of Ernie Barnes published. And for a minute, I was devastated. But
Yeah.
then my editor told me to go back and re-examine his life. And you know what? I think that was one of the best things that happened to me, because I did have to go back and take another look at his life and tell that story from a very different vantage point. And as I researched, what I discovered was that, again, Ernie Barnes was a kid who was not good at sports.
Mm-hmm.
And he was bullied for not being good with sports.
Right.
And I remember summer camps where the guys would get together on the basketball court and they would play hard, fighting, shirtless basketball game. Okay, and I avoided that like the plague. Okay, I would walk all the way around the block just not to be seen by the basketball players, and I would join the girls underneath a shelter where we would macrame and tie knots and paint pictures and color pictures. And but you know what? A lot of the guys, they would talk about you. They would say really mean things about guys who were artists.
Yeah.
So I certainly could relate to that experience that Ernie Barnes went through. So I just knew, doing that research and making that connection, that this was a story that I could tell. And oftentimes when I visit elementary schools, kids will tell me or ask me or advise me, Don, when are you going to write a story about yourself?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Ernie Barnes' story is probably the closest that I'll come to telling my own story in picture book format.
We still would love your story, Don. So I'm going to join that chorus, asking for a memoir style picture book or a graphic novel or middle grade, whatever you want to gift us with.
I'm actually working on a graphic novel memoir. So that's what I'm going to be working on this year. Yeah.
And I want to say too, you mentioned macrame twice. Shout out to macrame. I learned how to macrame too from my Aunt Jackie, so I'm a macrame fan. You talk to us about your research and writing process. How did you really immerse yourself in Ernie Barnes's world? You weren't able to interview him. So for people who might be wanting to write nonfiction or just be curious about your author process, how did you go about really, grounding yourself in who he was, and then sifting through all of that to figure out what thread you were going to weave through the story?
So my primary source for telling the story was Barnes' autobiography, From Pads to Palette. That was my primary source, but then I also relied on, you can see here, many newspaper articles, magazine articles. There was an article in Ebony. There was an article on the internet written by Alex Haley. So I used, newspaper articles, secondary sources. I also interviewed one of Ernie Barnes' childhood buddies. And so that was very cool to be able to, to speak to somebody who actually went to school, actually knew him and went to school.
Yeah.
Say, hey, yeah, he went to school right across the street. That was kind of cool. But my primary source was Pads to Palette. And I encourage you to get a better idea of Ernie Barnes' artwork to check out this book.
Okay, I'll put that, the title in the chat. Thank you so much. I loved when you were reading the story to us and we could hear your voice and then see the imagery. When you're an author illustrator, how do you make those choices? Because it's really, the whole process is up to you. So, how do you decide which medium or which form you're going to use to extend your storytelling in different ways? How does the art build upon or expand your words? And, how do the words create images that maybe the art cannot portray?
So I have an image that I'd like to share with you, but before I do that, I wanted to say that I don't consider myself to be a trademark illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
That I don't have one particular style or look that I illustrate every book in. I have to keep the work fun for myself, so I like to experiment with different media, different techniques, and different looks. And when I am considering a new manuscript to illustrate, I read that manuscript and I let the feel of the story kind of dictate the medium that I'm going to illustrate that story in. Oftentimes my books are very serious subject matter, so I try to choose a medium that kind of softens the blow, I guess you could say. For Pigskins to Paintbrushes, I made the intentional decision not to use a style that was representative of Ernie Barnes' style. I just didn't want to even try to get anywhere near copyright issues, that sort of thing.
Right.
So I went with the style that was more of a collage style and less, painterly.
Yeah.
I was going to share my screen.
And as you do that, we do have one related question I want to mention right now in the chat from Julia. She just said, do you write and then illustrate, or do you illustrate and then write, or do you mix it up?
That's a good question. So for me, and it works differently for every author illustrator. Some author illustrators begin with a picture. They create a wonderful picture, they put it out on Instagram or something, and the editor says, I love that character. Can you create a story around that character? For me, I think because I come from a background in commercial art, I have to have a product. I have to have a story first. So with me, I have to come up with a story. So I write that story, I revise the story. Sometimes I revise that story 40, 50 times before my agent. I even share it with my agent.
Yep.
And then when it comes time for me to sit down to illustrate it, I discover where there's certain things that I don't need to say, excuse me, because I'm going to illustrate those things. So I go in and I tweak the illustrations, and then I got to go back and tweak the words, and I got to go back and tweak the illustrations, and I kind of go back and forth, right up until it's time for the book to publish. So I'm one of those that drives my editor crazy.
I do a lot of tweaking too, so yeah, I'm on that train, tweaking train.
So on the topic of extending the story, as the illustrator, it's not my job to simply decorate the author's words. It's my job to tell the story visually. So on a page like this, where I'm speaking about Ernie Barnes being intimidated by the fact that he's not a good sports person, what other things do I want to communicate to my readers? Well, I want to communicate what the neighborhood may have looked like, that it was a lower socioeconomic neighborhood. However, Ernie was raised in a house where his parents had more money. This brick house with the white picket fence, they had more money. So I wanted, rather than to say that in the text, I communicate that in the illustrations. I don't have to say that Ernie Barnes was overweight. He was a self-described chubby. I don't have to say that with words. I show that through the illustrations. I imagine, because I don't know this 100% for sure, that these players, when I was in high school, or when I would try to play basketball, we always played shirts and skins. Okay, so rather than to say that in text, I show that through the illustrations. On this next page, I don't have to say that the neighborhood was segregated. I can show it through my illustrations with that big whites only sign. So through my illustrations, I'm communicating the things that are not there with the words.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And could you just mention too, I know that you have some of your illustrations with some notes on the Durham Arts Council site. So if you could just mention that for people that want to check that out, what you did with that.
Ooh, that's a good question. And I don't have the answer to that question.
Oh, that's okay. Well, yeah, I just
yeah.
Saw that they have kind of a little slideshow, a few of the spreads with some of your comments about the art. So for those of you who
you're in the chat.
Okay. Yes, yeah, for those of you who haven't seen it, we can put that link in the chat and then you can visit and check that out as well. What reception have you received from the book? Like, do you have kids that are connecting to Ernie's story? What resonates most with them? What makes you the most proud in what you were able to create?
The reception has been good, and I'll read you 3 snippets of reviews that I received, and then one of the best reviews that I received. So,
okay.
Kirkus says, Tate weaves Barnes' own voice into the smoothly told narrative to great effect. Will inspire young readers to stay true to themselves. And, I love that. I love those words because that was the main message that I wanted to convey to my reader. Is not to allow other people to define who you can be.
Right.
We are in control of our own destinies. We can decide who we're going to be. Publishers Weekly says Tate's tale illuminates the structural and social obstacles Barnes faced. From intense peer pressure to the adult Barnes longed for first trip to an art museum where he was told, your people don't express themselves this way, clearly highlights the idea that there need to be no division of interest between arts and sports. And then book list, I'll read this one last one.
Okay.
Book list, the nicely composed mixed media collage illustrations establish the 20th century setting while capturing the stages of Barnes' life. An expressive, engaging picture book biography. And those, professional trade reviews are nice, but the best reviews that I've received are those that come randomly to me from parents
Mhm.
who've read the book. And I've received many of these who say, Don, I love Pigskins to Paintbrushes. Thank you for writing stories that center Black people for our children. Um, and of course, I love the reviews that I receive from kids who read the
Yeah.
stories and say we love, we love the story.
Well, that is beautiful. Thank you so much. I don't want to take all the time with my questions because I see we have a nice, healthy number of questions in the chat. Lots of people that want to ask you things. Just want to give a couple of items that may be helpful to people. If you want to learn more about Don's body of work, one of the questions was, how many books do you have? So I'll go ahead and ask that one now.
So I have around 20-ish trade books that I've illustrated over the course of 30 years. Trade books
Mhm.
are books that are available through bookstores and in the publishing trade. And then I always say that I have 80 plus trade and educational books because I did begin in this business on the educational side. And
Right.
educational books are those that are available um, through the curriculum, through schools, through books that would be in the classroom that teach kids how to read.
That's amazing. And so if you want to learn more about his full body of work, you're going to visit his website, which I think we have in the chat, but I'll put it in there again. That's dontate.com. I saw some question about how to get your books. Book People is a wonderful indie in Austin, and Don lives in Austin. So if you want to have a personalized signed copy, you could order from Book People. If you want to support a local indie bookstore, Rofiwa is a Black-owned, amazing bookstore in Durham. It's vibrant. It's full of, so much thoughtfulness and intention. I'm sure they'd be happy to order the book for you. So if we could put those, we'll put those links in the chat for Don Tate, his website, for Rofiwa, the Black-owned bookstore in Durham, and his hometown bookstore, Book People. I'm going to go now to the chat and start to get through some of these wonderful questions. Let me see. Judy asks, what advice can you give to kids about pursuing their dreams even through adversity?
And you know what, Judy, and thanks for being here, Judy. This is going to sound really simple, really just simplistic, and it's just really you can't give up on your dreams. You can never give up on your dreams. I can remember so many times throughout my career where I was frustrated. I hit a wall and I questioned whether or not I could do this. Am I cut out to do this? On the illustration side and the writing side. And had I given up on my dreams, I would not be a published illustrator and author today. So it's just really simple. No matter how hard things get, no matter how big the adversity, plow through, don't give up, and you will eventually reach your goals. I can think of a whole lot of folks who dreamed of becoming an author, but who gave up because they received some rejection. And you know what? They'll never get published because they gave up.
Right. Yeah. All it takes is one yes. So Julia was asking about the number of books, which you answered, but how many out of those books have you written?
Ooh, that's a good question. So let me think about this. It just happened when Bill Traylor started to draw. I have Poet, The Remarkable Story of George Moses Horton. I have Strong as Sandow, How Eugene Sandow Became the Strongest Man on Earth. William Steele and His Freedom Stories, The Father of the Underground Railroad. Pigskins to Paintbrushes, The Story of Football Playing Artist Ernie Barnes. I have one that I can't mention yet because it hasn't been announced yet, but I have a new book that was just announced in Publishers Weekly this week. It's called Game On, and it's the story of the African American engineer responsible for inventing the very first interchangeable game cartridge for a video game. So all the kids play video games, but many probably don't know that it was an African-American man who designed video games in such a way that you can insert a cartridge and remove the cartridge and you could play mini games rather than having to play Pong and play Pong and play Pong.
That's amazing. And, just as you were sharing all those titles, I think that all of us can see how, you just had so much growth in your the range of your creativity. And we're really excited about all the books that you have coming on the way. You talked a little bit, since we have a Triangle area audience, let's talk a bit about Poet. Because some people may not be familiar with it. If you wouldn't mind holding it up, and maybe, I think you have it behind you, maybe, or nearby, and just tell us a little bit about the George Moses Horton and his story, and where he's from and all that.
So the remarkable story of George Moses Horton is the story of a man who was born enslaved. He really, as a child, wanted to learn how to read. But George was enslaved, and he knew his enslaver would never allow him to learn how to read. So what he did was he would listen as the white children studied their books. And eventually he could say the ABCs all on his own, and eventually he taught himself how to read. And his favorite thing to read was poetry. Eventually he learned how to compose poetry, and he would compose love poems for students at the University of Chapel Hill for their sweethearts. And he earned so much money selling the poetry that he was able to purchase his time away from his enslaver, where he could work as a full-time writer at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing story.
So yeah, I love the story. It's the story, of the first African American to get a book published in the South, and he published while he was still enslaved, and he published poems protesting his enslavement at a time when a Black man could be killed for doing such a thing.
Yeah, wow. I think that's all of our questions in the chat. I have one other question. What are a couple of the biggest lessons that you take from all these inspiring people who you've learned about and researched that, you really use in your own life?
That is a good one.
What are some of the...
And I feel like a broken record here, because I asked Judy, I told Judy to never give up. In every single instance, and every single one of my stories, it's all about these characters facing huge adversities.
Right.
Sometimes it's race, sometimes it's experience, sometimes, in the case of Eugene Sandell, he was born sick and he simply wanted to get healthy. In every instance, the character worked hard to reach their goals, and they never gave up, and they persevered through awful circumstances many times to become successful and make important contributions to the world. And I remember when my son was in elementary school, and I was, trying to write these stories, and I told him that, you're not supposed to write stories that are didactic, that teach a lesson. And my son said, Dad, I love stories that teach me a lesson, because I can use those lessons as a guide for navigating life myself. And so I think that's an important thing for young readers.
Well, that is perfect. Thank you so much, Don. And this was really illuminating and inspiring. And we loved hearing about Ernie Barnes' story and your own journey. We want to thank the Durham County Public Library for sponsoring this event, along with the Durham Arts Council. And also thank you to all the Piedmont Laureate partners, the United Arts Council of Raleigh and Wake County, the Orange County Arts Commission, and the Raleigh Arts Commission. We will, please do visit the Piedmont Laureate blog to stay up to date on things that I'm doing, as well as other children's literary events in the Triangle that I am shouting out. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we are really happy and blessed by having you.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I appreciate the time that you gave us tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jenny.
So much. Oh, you're welcome. I just have to make one more comment while you make me the host again.
Oh, you gotta
You'll need to make me the host in Zoom again. Your illustrations are clearly drawn with love, and I am, for one, am so grateful that you persisted in your art. So thank you. Thank you. I wanted to ask who your favorite artists were, and but you listed some great ones. If you want to give any more shout outs.
Kadir Nelson. Oh, the illustrator of Hair Love. Help me out, Kelly. Hair Love illustrator.
Now I'm blanking. It's the author's Matthew Cherry, but the illustrator is Vashti Harrison.
I love her stuff.
Yeah. Oh, we have one other question in the chat. Who is this? Julia. Does Eleanor Tate have a favorite book that you have written or illustrated? I'm guessing your favorite is the one that you have just finished.
A book that I illustrated for Eleanor?
Yeah, well, just out of your books, does your Aunt Eleanor have a favorite?
Oh, I don't know that for sure, but let me see. The book, Black All Around, written by Patricia Hubble, published with Lee and Low Books. I dedicated that book to Eleanor early on.
Oh, nice.
So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that that's her favorite book.
Good answer.
Wonderful. So it looks like, Don, you're still the host. If you could pass that over to me, then I can, see if there are any final questions. Lots of thanks and great kudos to you in the chat. People looking forward to reading it. And I just can't think of anyone who has not, recognized Sugar Shack from the beginning, the opening of Good Times.
I think you're the host now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. You did it. Thank you,
everybody.
Yes, thanks for all your.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night, Helen.